Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your regular retrospective on Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of the hosts. With me as always is your other salacious co-host.
Brian, I think you've used that one before.
Have I?
Probably.
You've probably been salacious before.
True.
Salubrious then. Salubrious co-host.
Meaning drunk.
Slippy as in drunk.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Good. Full of vim and vigour as always.
As always, of course.
I've just come off the high of presenting an online event to 40 people.
Yeah.
And I think I was one of maybe only 3 or 4 people who had their camera on, so that's like quite like speaking to the void a little bit, but I can carry that armor plated enthusiasm straight through into this recording.
So this episode we're going to be ranking episode 68 to 54, maybe we said minutes ago, which were 54 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, i.e. the 68th best to the 54th best in our Ranking the Vampire Slayer series, which is a thing maybe we're calling it, who knows. 2 programming notes. One is that we didn't mention last week, but my father recently he said to me recently, "Oh Brian, can you take this box of books that you own back to the house?" And I was like, okay, sure. And when I got home, he'd also included 2 more boxes.
Smuggled, really?
Yeah, because he is obsessed with making sure that I feel like I never lived in that house.
Yeah, erasing really your history.
Well, I moved out, Joel, in 2012, and when I was moving out, I was told you'll always have a bed to sleep here. And next week they burned the bed that I slept in growing up.
It's kind of a great bit, though.
It is, but cruel maybe. Anyway, we have all of the Buffy VHS's seasons 2 to 5 staring at us right now. They're kind of beautiful. I kind of love them. They're so like saturated color-wise, except for season 2, which is yellow and red, bizarrely. But everything else is absolutely beautiful.
Would you call that a piss yellow?
I would call that a piss yellow. Yeah,
absolutely.
A piss yellow for someone who's been drinking the wrong things. And the other programming note is that I spent a lot of time yesterday photoshopping different colors onto our walls, and not so much, this isn't so much a programming note to let people know anything except that like I think that's who I am now, and you should all just be prepared for that. You
sent them to me. I did think you were using an app and you had just like meticulously manually recolored photos of our walls. That's with the aim of painting the walls, if this isn't some weird tick you've developed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I sent it to my mother and she said, God, you've done that really quickly, but you did a really bad job of it. Because she thought I had actually painted the walls, and like it was a bad Photoshop job, so who knows. Yeah. So in terms of Bronze Banter this week, Joel, what would you like to chat about? Yeah, I thought we might start off with as we have forayed occasionally into other pop culture properties. We watched the first episode so far of Moon Knight, which is the latest Marvel property. Oscar Isaacs of kind of unfortunately Star Trek or Star Wars sequel film fame. Ex Machina.
Probably.
He was Apocalypse and X-Men Apocalypse.
He was in Annihilation.
He was in Annihilation. He's wonderful in Annihilation. He's a wonderful actor. He's a very handsome man, and he
for a great actor, he has he has a weird hit rate, I think, because like X-Men Apocalypse, poor film. The Star Wars films, he is pretty good in them, but they're some of their uneven overall. Ex Machina and Annihilation, like 2 of the greatest science fiction films. Yeah. But yeah, this is his real.
There's other stuff that we're missing there for sure.
There's
Oscar Isaacs.
There's the lonesome guitar of Thelonious Darby, whatever that's called.
You mean? Oh God, you push it right.
I have,
ahead.
yeah.
The Coen Brothers movies. Did you see that one of the Coen Brothers is actually now directing solo? Isn't that weird? I think everyone's retired. So you're talking about the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. That's a different one. It's a movie we watched and really liked.
Inside Llewyn Davis.
Inside Llewyn Davis, of course. Really love that movie. Anyway, so yeah, Moon Knight. Only the first episode out so far. It's presenting very similar to Venom, voice in your head who's funnier than you, but also is you, which is performed by
F. Murray Abraham.
Yep, the person who, like Joel singularly presumes I do not know who it is, because Joel was once in Amadeus, so you think you know everything about Amadeus. We have watched so many things with him in it. I know exactly who More Abrahams is. I also knew him from Amadeus. So.
A very famous, very successful actor. The three things I know him from most prominently are nerdy first and foremost, and are mostly not good, because he was the villain in a Star Trek film, and he also was a villain in Last Action Hero, which is an Arnold Schwarzenegger film where he comes out of the, he plays an action hero, comes into the real world, which I love, and people critically pan. So
I love that movie too, Joel.
Well, there you go. So we're all agreed, and he voices the currently disembodied persona. So I think the Moon Knight character is itself is kind of, I want to say slightly golden or silver age, but it's
certainly B role.
Yeah,
a B tier Marvel character.
Power,
I never read any comics by it.
Powers derived from kind of Egyptian mythology. My understanding is in the original comics, he is a Batman adjacent playboy billionaire who is also has a vendetta by night, but this is like a completely new interpretation, and I think is drawing a lot from kind of dissociative identity disorder and that kind of multiple personality space. Yeah,
which is so worrying, because dissociative identity disorder as a plot point is a really unusual one to use, specifically because whenever dissociative identity disorder, which has often been referred to as multiple personality disorder in the past, whenever it's portrayed in popular media, it tends to lead to massive outbursts of diagnosis of it as a mental illness. Specifically with Split and Sybil in the past.
Sybil, like the example, I think, for a lot of people. I think was that
Sally Field's TV movie, 70s.
70s, yeah.
Or if the movie's not the 70s, then the book certainly is. And yeah, it's like a miniature. It's kind of a miniature like moral panic that happens, kind of like the way. Quite often, it's also quite a controversial diagnosis. Just generally, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak to this obviously, but it's a diagnosis that is.
You can speak to the fact that there is controversy around.
It's certainly controversial as a diagnosis, and the degree to which the people who diagnose it tend to be a very small amount of people, and it tends to be a very beneficial diagnosis for the psychiatrist or psychologist to diagnose, in terms of being able to write about their subjects and stuff like this. There's also, like, unfortunately, like, there's tons and tons of DID content on TikTok, which tends to be hugely derided. I don't want to go speculating about whether or not these people have dissociative identity disorder. It absolutely leads to nowhere. What I will say is that people treat these people like absolute trash, which is absolutely gross.
On TikTok.
Yeah, on TikTok specifically. Anyway,
that's a tangent about DID, which is definitely a fact. I will never expect Marvel to do the heavy lifting of actually educating people about mental health.
The other person's in it is Ethan Hawke, who I love.
Also a very strange person in real life.
I love as an actor in the sense that I love pretty much everything he's in. Before the Before trilogy, like, undoubtedly my favorite series of movies of all time. As in, like, favorite sequence of movies of all time. But as a person, just fucking bizarre, and such like he's an fucking
actor. Yeah,
he's so up himself, and I love that for him. Like, I don't think he's in any way a bad guy. I think he's specifically, his heart's in the right place, and he tries really hard, but he just comes across so fucking wanky. It's unbelievable. But it's fascinating so far, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes. I hope it goes a horror direction.
Oscar Isaac's doing a much commented upon. It's like 75% their English accent for one of his main personas, which I've seen that he has claimed is intentionally off-putting, which if it is, I believe him, to be honest, and I love that choice. But yeah, it's consumable Marvel fare so far. It is, we've more to watch, but it's very much already like middle tier, I think, because some of the Marvel TV shows have been really like a chore to actually get through.
Yeah,
it's been enjoyable so far. So and it's maybe a little more fun than the average Marvel TV show so far. So like, I think it's a good watch.
Yeah. The other more significant, I would say, thing that we've been watching is Our Flag Means Death.
Yeah. Which
is a new HBO Max comedy. It's a half-an-hour comedy. It is created by Taika Waititi, of Jojo Rabbit, what we do in the shadows, and
Thor
Flight of the Conchords.
Thor Ragnarok,
Flight of the Conchords, Fame. Famous funny man, genuinely very funny guy. I have a lot of time for anything Taika Waititi does. I I think everyone does. I don't think people say maybe he might go through a bit of a Lin-Manuel Miranda moment in the future. I can see that happening where people are like,
We get Mirandized.
But I don't think anyone has significant bad things to say about him right now. So it's his TV show. It is about two real historical pirates who existed, one of whom is Blackbeard and the other of whom is Stede Bonnet, who was a fancy boy who grew up in
Barbados.
As
in English, in like landed
colonial,
the gentleman pirate,
yeah, exactly. And he considers himself to be a gentleman pirate because he came from a wealthy background and decided he just wanted to go out pirating because it looked real fun, basically. So cultural appropriation from the pirates, of the pirates is what I mean. And basically, it's about it's a comedy about his crew and how he idolizes Blackbeard. And eventually comes to meet Blackbeard and develop a relationship-ish with Blackbeard. And it's super fucking gay.
Can I evangelize a little bit?
Yeah.
I've been evangelizing out of this show. And I could talk for the hour about Our Flag Means Death. I'm kind of really committed to it at the moment. I think it's a fascinating watch for anyone who's interested in kind of the stuff that we cover in this podcast because... Specifically, so as you mentioned, because Rhys Darby, who is also Flight of the Conchords, Taika Waititi regular collaborator, etc., plays the main character. Stede Bonnet, who, as you know, is a real personages who did know each other and who did buy a ship and buy a crew to pirate with no experience and no ability to be a pirate. And the first 3 or so episodes are enjoyable comedy half-hour fare based on a fairly broad concept, and the jokes are pretty decent, but they're not particularly layered. And about halfway through, it takes this really, not necessarily jarring, but really intense tonal shift where you can kind of see that a lot of the jokes, which as a queer viewer, you're like, oh, I'm being queer baited. These kind of gay adjacent jokes, they're benign. Oh, it was nice that they alluded to maybe gay things were happening here. And suddenly it becomes, throughout the crew, textually, canonically, well-written queer storylines. Mm-hmm. And then fever dream episodes of just bizarre happenstances,
remembrances, nightmares, yeah.
And the performances go up a notch, and you've a character who you think the joke is that they're a woman masquerading as a man in a Shakespearean sense. It turns out no, the text is actually saying they are non-binary and they start to be referred to as they, etc. And the relationship between Stede and Taika Waititi as Blackbeard and Stede and Blackbeard as played by Taika Waititi is undoubtedly one of the better written and more genuine and non-queer baggy queer storylines between two men I've seen on TV in a long time. It is a gripping watch, and it is on course to really erode my cynicism about this kind of stuff. And and this is subjective, I have gotten very emotional watching it at certain points, and I kind of have alluded to it. It has that almost like that quality of luring you in with a good laugh. I was like, oh no, I actually really care about what's happening here. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to relate until you watch it, but I think it is a journey, and I would be very short as well. It's like 9 episodes, a half hour. It's just a lot happens in those half hours, and very queer and very just men having emotional interiority, which is like fascinating to watch in this modern day, I think. Yeah,
highly recommended. Everyone's kind of on it at the moment, I think. It starts off slow and it gets really good, is what we'll say about it. I also finished Elden Ring this week, or last night specifically. It was good fun. I really recommend it if you like that kind of thing. If you don't like that kind of thing, don't do it. But it's very, very good. Had a lot of time.
It's a cultural moment, really, this game. Like, people who do not care about these games, or games,
which I do,
are talking about it. Do you know what I mean? Are like, oh, this might be something, just if you're a person who experiences big moments in this kind of way, like, you might want to at least have some passing understanding of it.
Yeah. Okay, let's move into our rankings.
Yeah, so speaking of men with very emotional interiority and homoerotic relationships, this chunk of ranking the Vampire Slayer, really we start to dig into the season 5s, the season 4s, the season 3s. We have Riley in there, we have classic Spike stuff, we really kind of see this is this is a big part of the era where the characters, I think, got depth.
Yeah. There was, I'd say, 2 episodes here where we had to look up the plot of them while we were talking about them, just to be like, oh, which one's that again? Whereas previously it was every second episode, really.
Yes.
So we're really getting into the like memorable stuff.
I would kind of name this like maybe second tier good episodes.
I would say this is A- tier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's A- or better going forward. Okay, where it's A-, A+, and then maybe S. I don't know, who knows. So first off, at rank number 68, we have No Place Like Home, season 5, episode 5. Joel initially rated this 8.3 bags of ground up cloven hooves.
And Brian rated it 8.4 birthings.
Cool. So this episode, Joel, is the one where
No Place Like Home is the episode in season 5 where we have the start of the escalation of the Dong as key storyline. So we have some introduction, some material with Ben in the hospital. We have Buffy seeing through the glamour of what Dong is a little bit and thinking potentially she is the threat, or understanding that she's not real. We have that kind of foundational key stuff about the Czech monks and in this episode, and culminating in Buffy coming to understand that this sister character that we've been unceremoniously in a positive way kind of introduced at the start of season 5, we're like, who is this interloper? Buffy coming to understand what she is, why she's there, why it's important to protect her. So I think this is a good episode on a couple of fronts. One is that we have the introduction and the escalation of the glory stuff and kind of the setting the stakes of that with the key. But also I think Dong in season 5, big swing, as a character. You really as a plot, you really have to it might be the first time in the show where they introduce something where they don't let the audience in on it really for a bit. She's just kind of there for the first couple of episodes, as opposed to usually you see everything that is happening as the audience. So you have to have a bit of faith that it's going somewhere. And I think this is the episode where it's like, oh, okay, I'm now invested and this is paying off for me. You're starting to like a trajectory.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this first 5 weeks of watching this podcast, watching this TV show, season 5, you're probably like, what the fuck is happening? Why are they why have they introduced Dawn? Why are they not explaining it? What the fuck's going on? And I think this is a real beginning of paying off an oddity.
Yeah, like I notably thought I just hadn't been paying attention and she had a sister.
Yeah, no, me too. But I because I jumped on in season 4 when I was a child. Anyway, but it's fascinating, and it's a good plot. And the stuff at the end where Buffy commiserates with Dawn and apologizes and sees her as a real person and her sister speaks to a lot of what we say about this show about how what it speaks to about family. And is that the phrase, found family? Found
family, absolutely. And the fact that Buffy sees people's inherent value even when there's easy reasons to discard them, and that's one of her driving talents, and it's not shared by everyone on the show. So she sees Dong. I think it would be reasonable not to relate to Dom, but she understands it's something that needs, and someone who needs protecting. I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, and I think going forward from that point where she gets from this point to her entire break towards the end of the season, of like breakdown of herself towards the end of the season, and her her sacrifice for Dawn, I believe it. And I think it's well written. I think it's a beginning. I think the foundations are laid in this episode.
Yeah, and I think if you get anyone to write down 5 things they remember from season 5, like this thing with the monk and the key is like going to be way up there. Yeah,
undoubtedly. Okay, next up at number 67, we have Buffy vs. Dracula, season 5, episode 1. Joel initially rated this 8.8 toplesses. Giles.
And Brian rated it 8.0 giving up men's.
Nice. So I think this is a strong episode in many ways. It's a really odd, I think it is the oddest season opener of all of Buffy. As you look at Welcome to Hellmouth, When She Was Bad, Anne, the freshman, this, then what's the
Bargaining
part 1, and then obviously what's it called actually, the beginning of season 7? Lessons. They're all quite standard. They're kind of just like introductory episodes. This isn't. This is very much a continuation of stuff in lots of ways. Some of the strengths about it, I mean, the actual monster of the weakness, the Dracula stuff, lots of fun. The Xander stuff, very funny. where he's his thrall.
Yeah, 100%.
I think what we kind of learn about Buffy's nature, about her, there's a lot of conversation about Dracula seeing a monstrousness in her, which is very much coming on from from Restless, which kind of talks about Buffy's kind of like origins as a character and as a lineage in what happened to the first Slayer. And then also, and at the end of the episode, Buffy talks to Giles to ask him to help her to discover what this is. Additionally, I really like the subtlety of introducing Dawn in this episode, where if you watch closely, it's clear that she doesn't exist up until the end of the episode.
Yeah, 100%. So I agree with all that. I think this episode never quite sticks with me very well. It does feel out of place in Buffy, but I think it's kind of experimental in a way that I kind of appreciate. Buffy very, very rarely leans on pulling in classic monster tropes or references. Like a lot of shows, they get to a fifth season and they're like, it's just all fan servicey stuff, Yeah. So I think this is really, the fact that they only really do it, I think, with Dracula once, is kind of admirable in a way.
Yeah.
And I think Dracula integrates reasonably well into the pre-existing Buffy stuff and saying, look, he's just one og vampire in the way that we've seen og vampires before. Might be one of Xander's strongest episodes in terms of he's just comedic in it.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, Giles with the three brides and all that kind of stuff. The comedy is kind of really good. The progression of the, really the breather, I think, is maybe why it's here. There's a breather in between the end of the Adam stuff, the intensity of Restless. I was like, look, we're going to go into a whole other thing. And I do think you're absolutely correct that Dawn does not exist. Like the spell is cast elsewhere in the closing minutes of the show.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the great twists is, seeing her and them both being like, Mom. There's a real economy of writing to that, which I think is deft.
More like, Mom.
Yeah.
Okay. Up next at number 66 is The Freshman, season 4, episode 1. Joel rated this 7.9 concussions.
And Brian rated it 8.5 Dadist pep talks.
Dadaist. Yeah, I would have done that. So, an unusual one where I rated it higher than you did. I like this episode a lot.
Another season opener. It is the one where Buffy goes to college. She the show started being shot in widescreen, which is one of my major remembrances from this, because there are scenes where you can see the lens because they shot it extreme wide angle lens, and you can just see it in the camera, which is very funny. You have Buffy makes a friend who then gets killed by a vampire gang who is led by Sunday, who is a really ridiculous character, but I kind of like, who is kind of like a real I'm not even sure what that stereotype is really. Like almost like someone's guessed at what an emo is like, but
emos, they did exist this time, but they're extremely underground.
Well, sure, but but that's exactly it. Like, this is an amalgamation of people's assumption of what slightly alternative college students are like, So I think as a season opener, I think it had a massive challenge, because the first 3 seasons are a very cohesive arc, and I think this is the kind of change of setting that's usually associated with a show jumping the shark or changing network or something, or a change of cast or something more severe. I think it does pretty well. I think the college stuff is good, and I think there's a nice evolution of the characters. I'm a little lower on this than some, because I think these first few episodes in college, it does struggle to kind of find its voice, particularly since Xander isn't really here, and what's Giles' role.
Xander isn't here at all in this episode until the very end of the episode, right?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
And then he gives her a genuine lovely pep talk.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's all positive. And it really does portray Buffy as still, like, what is she at this point, like 19?
Oh gosh, maybe.
Let's say 19, right? Yeah. The stuff with Sunday isn't to do with her actually being challenged by this, like, not even that old vampire. It's just her being insecure about herself, and I think the way they continue to show that actually can make her vulnerable is good. It's just like, is Parker in this episode potentially as well?
I think he's introduced in this episode, as is Riley.
Yeah, so all that stuff is fine. It's just I find it's trying to struggle to find its voice just a tiny touch early on.
I'd agree with that.
But I like the college setting. I think the college setting has been underrated in retrospect.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, great. Next up we have number 65, Checkpoint, season 5, episode 12, and Joel initially rated this 8.0 expertly flung broadswords.
And Brian rated 8.3 lesbian gay type lovers.
Lovely. So this is the episode where the it's the episode where the council comes back. It comes to evaluate. But you should really speak to this. This is really your area of expertise.
Sure. So this is one of the formative episodes in the entire canon for the Watchers Council. They have information on what the threat is, what glory is. They come to Sunnydale to assess, evaluate Buffy as the current Slayer, Mr. Giles' role in her life, the Scooby Gang, all this kind of stuff. I would say 35% of what we know about the Watchers Council is in this episode, in terms of how some of the council members, one of them has written a thesis on Spike, on William the Bloody, how they interact with each other, how they all have, even though they're a mildly diverse council, they're clearly part of the English kind of aristocracy, or not the English power structure at least.
I would certainly say aristocracy. There is not a single working class person there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Though I do think that a lot of the time that the US struggles to conceive of working class people from England specifically.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and the prolificness of that part of the identity as well. Anyway, the first half of the episode is actually good tension. It's good, and it's actually good comedy because there's a lot of them interviewing. The Scoobies being interviewed by the council and trying to put their best foot forward and putting their foot in it by calling themselves lesbian gay type lovers and stuff like that.
For me, it's one of the most. It is probably my favorite episode, which is Magic Shop Centric. Yeah. It's just, I remember watching it when I was a child and thinking, this is such a lovely place to hang out. They all get to sit on the
upstairs balcony
balcony and watch as Buffy at the end of the episode delivers this incredible speech where she says that she's absolutely not accepting the misogynistic nonsense of the council anymore, that they'll be paying Giles for back pay for all the pay they haven't paid.
Back pay line is funny.
Yeah. And Buffy saying, no, I don't need you, you need me.
Yeah.
And then the incredible needle skip at the very end of the episode of finding out that Glory is a god, which is thrilling. It's great.
I absolutely agree. I think this is how you transmute writing, because the Watchers Council as a concept in the early seasons seems like a flimsy concept and seems like not well developed, and sometimes the instinct would be, well, let's give them loads of detail and let's make it really logical, etc. And instead what this does, it says, the Watchers Council doesn't make sense, and that is canonical, because they are only motivated and built around, in theory, supporting service of the Slayer, who is this one girl who doesn't really get a lot of support from the council and to which they don't have a purpose without. And her getting outside of that and speaking truth to power in this episode and saying, no, you are here because of me, you're going to work with me, and this is how it's going to work from now on, and demonstrating that, throwing the sword and demonstrating there's a reason why she is the one they should be listening to. The way that the Scoobies love her in this episode, not look up to her, but really love her. The pride you see in Giles, it is all expertly done, and I do 100% think that one of the most iconic escalations in this show is the head of the council, whose name escapes me at the moment, Travers at the end of the episode saying that Glory's not a demon, she's a god, and that has stuck with me. Like that is fear-ridden writing.
Okay, next up at number 64, we have Consequences, Season 3, Episode 15, and originally Joel rated this episode 8.2, bodies fished out of the river with splinters in his heart.
And Brian rated 7.1 grapes.
I'm more comfortable with my rating. I can't remember why I didn't like this episode as much as you did. In retrospect, I think it was probably the morality of it and the oddity of it. And so
this is post-murdering Season 2.
Yep. So
Season 3, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. In Season 3, in Bad Girls, Buffy and Faith start being best friends. They start being extremely homoerotic with each other, which is incredible. And they eventually end up accidentally murdering, Faith accidentally murders Alan Tudyk.
I don't think Deputy Mayor Alan necessarily has a last name.
I think he might do. Anyway, we remember Alan, that's more than he deserves. So she
2
accidentally...
L's as well.
Sorry?
2 L's.
Oh, she accidentally murders him. And this episode is basically about the exploration of trying to get Faith to do the right thing, but she doesn't. So tell us more, Joel.
Yeah, so I think it does hang a little bit on how the the moral play about Faith killing a human plays out for you. I think that whole arc in terms of Buffy finding something really valuable in terms of someone who shares her experience, being able to let loose and all that, and then coming to this point where they do diverge, is really strong. I think in this episode, I think we see a lot of Eliza Dushku portraying Faith as brash but scared.
Yeah, there's a moment where Faith goes to Giles to tell him that Buffy is the one who killed Alan, which is really upsetting. It's a real moment of like clear traumatized child behavior from Faith, and of course Giles doesn't believe her for a second, and that's also heartbreaking, you know. There's
a lot around this point of Faith being hurt by the fact that she would love to be inside, but it takes her like 4 more years to understand that. I think
there's also the very questionable scene where Faith attempts to rape Xander nearly, but then Angel clubbers her with a bat to stop her.
It's all weird energy. I don't think it's easy to unpack. Yeah,
it's not easy to unpack. It's a fascinating arc. It is very interesting. It is worthwhile watching, and I think it's, I don't know, I do enjoy the whole sequence, I must say. Yeah,
it's a good sequence. It's just whether this episode is the strongest one in there. But I always like that the show was willing to, Buffy at its best remains kind of grounded. Like, what if these monsters were only 2 degrees removed from real life, and what would people be like in this situation? And if you get too superhero, well, that's season 8.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, so next up at rank number 64, I think. Wait 1 second, let me check.
That would be 63, Brian.
Next up, at rank number 63, we have A New Man, Season 4, Episode 12. And Joel initially rated this 8.3 slices of birthday cake out of 10.
Brian rated it 8.3 Irish Troubles. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, so this is the episode where Giles gets turned by Ethan Rayne into a...
Fnarl demon, I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think it's the last Ethan Rayne episode.
I think that might be right. Yeah. So this is obviously a Giles-centric episode. He wakes up as this giant... demon that looks
after a night of drinking with Ethan.
After a night of drinking with Ethan that looks like a Dragon Age character and doesn't speak English.
And the context of this is that Giles has been feeling very useless in his role up to this point.
8.3 I think I ranked it. I think I stand by that. I think that this is a really strong Giles episode, in terms of it's a very strong comedy episode. You can't hire Anthony Stewart Hegg for Giles in season 1 and you're like, if he can do a bit of dry wit, that's great, but it turns out he's actually really funny. And this episode, I think, it lives or dies on his ability to do that. I like every Ethan Rayne episode. I like their relationship. I like everything it implies. And I think that you get a really plausible reason for him to be isolated from the gang, relying on Spike to a little bit in this episode as well,
because Spike can speak Fnarl.
And it can sometimes be difficult to plausibly isolate them, and it doesn't work if they're always all together, all agreeing with each other. And sometimes that plot is because they've decided for 7 hours to not trust this person, and then they will, and that I hate that. But this gives a good setting for it, I think.
100%. And it gives me one of my favorite headcanon moments of this show, which is that in this episode you see Giles is like Buffy realizes that it's Giles because she looks into his eyes and she sees him. She's like, she can recognize Giles behind there. And in just a couple of episodes after this, you have Riley have sex with Faith, with Buffy in her body. Sorry,
with Buffy's body and Faith inside of.
Yeah, exactly.
That didn't help, I don't think.
No,
he thinks he's having sex with Buffy, but it's actually Faith in her body.
Yeah, and in my headcanon, that's really contributes to why Riley is not for Buffy, is that he can't see that it's Buffy. It's not Buffy in there. You know?
I think that's a great note to carry through. Yeah.
It's a good moment. It's a strong comedic episode, and I love a Giles-centric. Okay, next up we have Real Me. Next up at rank number 62, we have Real Me, Season 5, Episode 2. Joel initially rated this 8.0 midlife crisis.
And Brian rated it 8.5 censuses takers.
Great. So this is the episode where we get a sense of Dawn's life.
Yeah, I think this is a reasonably controversial episode, because this is the first episode post Dawn's introduction. We get to see this fiction of what Dawn Summers, Buffy's longtime sister, lives. The episode that, notably, as we've noted before, Dawn's character was originally written to be younger,
yeah.
and she comes across much more Harriet the Spy here than a teenager. So yeah, what's your retrospective on the Dawn in introductory episode?
Sure. So I would say a couple of different things. One is that my memory of this episode is it being a lot of fun. It is Dawn telling her story from her perspective, and definitely in a younger voice than intended, but I don't think it necessarily takes away from it in the long run. I think this episode, when we watched it this go around, we were surprised by how competent Michelle Trachtenberg was in her portrayal of the character, and how nuanced. And we found it genuinely funny, and we found it an interesting interjection of difficulty for our characters. I agree with all that still, for sure. And I do really like the character of Dawn, the Dawn trajectory. With that as well, I think you get some odd things. And my one ding against the episode is the end of the episode where Dawn kind of says, they'll all see what I have in store for them, kind of thing. And it's kind of like implied that maybe she's in on the menace that she represents in Glory.
That happens once or twice across the Buffy and Angelverse. I think we said that as well about Spike in the second to last episode of the show, suggesting that he's going to turn evil or something. And that's a crutch.
Cheap.
Yeah, cheap is a good word.
It's cheap. The episode has Harmony in it, where Dawn unintentionally invites Harmony in, and that's very funny. Yeah,
and I think I will echo that. There's something a little tiring about the kiddie stuff with Dawn occasionally, but I like Michelle Trachtenberg as an actor. I think she is energetic. I think she is a good comedian, and I think she has maybe the single most thankless role of any actor coming onto this show. It is always difficult to be the kid wonder. Do you know what I mean? The cousin Oliver character being injected in. Do you know what I mean?
I think, for my money's worth, she does a far, far better job than Wesley Crusher, at least.
Well, yes, but I don't know why you think I'm a Wesley defender constantly.
Because you have constantly defended them. Next up, we have rank number 61, and we have this point, The Replacement, season 5, episode 3. Joel rated this episode 8.5. Thoughts? I'm not sure which of those two things he did.
Brian rated it 8.0. Theodoraxes? Question mark. This is a mystery.
Yeah, I don't want to go back and have to find out about this. So this is the episode where Xander gets split into two, a confident side and an unconfident side. It's a strong episode. I would say, like the Xander-centric episodes tend to be decent because like he tends to get some decent writing. It's not nearly as good as the Zeppo, I would say, but it's certainly very, very, very good. Yeah, I like this episode for a lot of reasons. I remember watching this as it came out, and it was a lot of fun. The twist at the end that they're both Xander, and they need to be reintegrated. It's all good stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think this very consciously is in the style of a Star Trek the original series or an Outer Limits episode, or the doppelganger is a very well established trope in deep in our psyches when it comes to this kind of fiction. And notably, this has Nicholas Brendan's brother involved with it as well for some scenes. What was his brother's name again?
I don't remember.
I used to know it really well, but his brothers, it's his twin brothers in this as well. What are the twin brothers doing? And I think that he does get better writing. He works better by himself. When he's not in opposition to stuff. He is a good comedic character when he's used that way.
He's a fantastic performer as well, I would say. I'd say like I have no issues with Nicholas Brendan as a performer. I think he does a good job with Xander. I think it makes him often very warm and often very funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does take an interesting direction. It's a mystery and you're trying to solve it. And you only see what Xander's seeing for a lot of it. You're on his side, and it's the best kind of Buffy episode in the sense that while the monster's interesting, the comedy is interesting, it's also a way to explore the character, and we have the Snoopy dance and all that kind of really
Snoopy dance is iconic, and you also get that kill us both Spock line, which I think is and then both bursting into most disgusting laughter with each other. It's a good treatise on Xander's worth as a character.
Yeah, he's a bag influence on himself.
Yeah. Next up at number 60, we have School Hard, season 2, episode 3, and Joel initially rated this 8.3 red hot tampons. Okay.
And Brian rated it a 7.5 messes. So this is the introductory episode for Spike.
Yeah, and I definitely underrated this episode.
Yeah, I think it's more bare bones on plot, as an earlier episode tends to be. But
it's not consistent with Spike's portrayal later on in the show.
It isn't, but I do think there's an element of, we see in this episode, if you want to look at it as a whole piece, we see Spike from the outside. If you saw Spike doing this now, you would know the character and maybe a bit of the bravado he's putting on. But what we're trying to portray with Spike is introduce this idea of a thoroughly modern vampire.
Yep.
So he makes a joke in this episode about whether, when Angel turns up, he doesn't know that Angelus is ensouled. I'm going to question mark on potentially. He is saying to people, Angel, are people still falling for the Anne Rice routine? And making this, really establishing this idea that all of the fiction about vampires is from a human perspective, but vampires are essentially these vicious animals, which is something that the other things have tried to do, but Buffy, I think, is the best at doing that, suggesting that the vampirism is a real menace. Yeah. And we have the school setting itself with the parent-teacher meeting. This is a great episode for Joyce as well, and weirdly the start of her relationship with Spike, which is quite a good dynamic. I would maybe argue for this as my favorite Joyce episode, except for Band Candy. 100%. In terms of her saying, "Get the hell away from my daughter."
Get the hell away from my daughter. She is inspired by Buffy's heroism to see herself as a hero as well, and to protect her daughter through force against these incredibly powerful people.
Hepped up on PCP.
And it's inspiring and beautiful.
Yeah, and it's a great episode for Angel as a...
Giving Angel some back... giving Angel... if you were watching this at the time and you're like, ooh, gosh, Angel.
Yeah.
Some interesting things there, because you can see a hint of Angelus where he pretends to be giving Xander.
Killing Xander. And Xander's not 100% certain if he's lying or not.
And, which is obviously great foreshadowing for what happens later on the season.
I think one of the most underrated things in retrospect for me in terms of Buffy is when Angel is actually a member of the Scoobies.
Yeah,
because there is actually a good stretch there where he's doing that.
I love Angel as a member of the Scoobies.
Yeah, and so a great Spike episode, I think, is the reason people like this character enough that he continued for another 9 seasons or something. Yeah, so I think it has to stem from this being well established. So I like Skullheart.
Yeah, me too. Okay, next up we have Something Blue, season 4, episode 9. Joel initially rated this 7.7 half finished Bud Lights out of 10.
And Brian rated 8.1 Kiss the Librarians.
Yeah, so this is the episode where Willow does a spell to try to stop being in love with Oz, and it backfires and instead makes Buffy in love with Spike.
Yeah, and there's an element, isn't it, of what people say coming true. It's not just love. Someone said to Spike and Buffy, "Why don't you get engaged?" or something. Yeah.
Xander becomes a demon magnet. Yeah. So everything that Willow says comes through. So she tells she gives out about Giles not being able to see anything. He goes blind.
Yeah, which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, she gives out about Xander being a demon magnet. He becomes an actual demon magnet, and Buffy and Spike fall in love with each other. It's a good comedy episode. It's a good picking up from the previous episode, which was Pangs, where Oz leaves Willow. She's still in pain here, but it's a nuanced exploration of a good character, I think. And yeah, you get things like at the end of the episode, I think DeHoffrin offers Willow a job, which I think is pretty cool. Stuff like this.
I think it's a really early recognition that I think if one of the earliest recognitions DeHoffrin says something along the lines of Willow being far more powerful than people realize, that she was able to execute this. And I do think we get these occasional, we need a word for what these episodes are. It's like tabula rasa as well, or these things where basically the whole gang gets to do something wacky. Yeah,
I would suggest the person who absolutely murders those episodes with their skill is
Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Sarah Michelle Gellar playing anything that's not Buffy is incredible.
Or she plays so many Buffys. In Superstar, she's the Buffy who is the Slayer but also isn't Jonathan.
In Doppelgangland, she's not in The Wish. She is the harshest possible Buffy.
Yeah. In Halloween, she's Elizabethan Buffy, and in this she plays a Buffy who is thunderously and cloyingly in love with Spike, while still hating him, and manages to like make that work as a character. I think it's great for that respect. Yeah,
it's great. It's a great comedy episode. Okay, next up we have Sorry, I keep doing this wrong. Number 58, we have season 3, episode 19, Choices. Joel initially rated this 8.6 fatal pencils out of 10,
and Brian rated it 8.6. Sorry, that made me laugh. 8.6. Twice blessed sage. Ding ding ding.
Excellent. This is the episode where the box of Gavrok is coming for this is all kind of coming up to the ascension for the mayor, so it's lots of ascension stuff. It's a lot of Faith stuff. Faith kills a courier. Willow gets kidnapped, and while they're kind of swapping the box for Willow, the box gets opened and one of the spiders gets out, and it's kind of terrifying. And
there is so then the cafeteria, I want to say, somewhere, it's dark in the room, they're trying to catch the spider, and the mayor says that inside the box of Gavrok there's 6 billion other spiders in this like transcendental space, and that's also something that really stuck with me as like such a bizarre concept. But we have a prisoner exchange.
We have a great moment where Oz basically they are talking about, well, like, you know, can we afford to do this? Maybe it's a book of Ascension that they're having to exchange. No, it's the box. But I, as far as I know, Oz basically makes it impossible for them to not save Willow in this situation. Like, you know, which is
he smashes something or something like that. They have to hand it over because there's no question.
Right, I think that's this episode. Anyway, and then you, at the end of the episode, you have a great moment. Basically, the whole episode the context is the Scooby Gang's talking about what they're going to do in the future, where they're going to go to college. And there's an incredible moment where Willow says that she is going to be going to UC Sunnydale, where she says, "No, I'm not stuck here with you. I choose to do this with you."
Yeah.
And
I remember thinking that was very significant because I didn't remember that moment. She has options to go to MIT and NASA and the Vulcan Science Academy and all that kind of stuff, and instead she says, "No, I'm choosing to stay here because doing good with you is what I do." And I think that radically changes the arc of her character, where whatever she worries about in future, she's not a sidekick, she's a hero here as well, you know, and I think that's really important.
Absolutely. You have a couple of elements there as well, where the mayor tells Buffy and Angel that they have no future together, and they kind of after that they try to convince each other that they do, but they both know that they don't, and that's why Angel eventually leaves.
He talks about his own wife growing old and dying, and the mayor does, and kind of being left alone. All that.
You have Willow, who has actually read some of the books of Ascension while she's caught, like, trapped, and she remembers this, and she's able to communicate it to the other Scoobies. And at the end of the episode, there's also a scene where Xander sees Cordelia in a shop looking at a dress and is really bitchy towards her and really mean, and it turns out she's working there because her father's gone bankrupt, and it's kind of heartbreaking. Because why the fuck are you being mean to Cordelia, Xander?
He came in off the street to attack her, I think.
You cheated on her, and she doesn't want to go out with you anymore, so you're being mean to her. Like, fuck off, honestly. Anyway, good episode. Next up, we have, at number 57, The Initiative, Season 4, Episode 7. We were quite surprised because Joel rated this episode 9 tainted blood bags out of 10. And
Brian rated it 8.7 sassy cabernets. So maybe before we talk about why we rated it or why we think we rated it, what happens in The Initiative?
So The Initiative is the episode where Spike wakes up in The Initiative. He and eventually has his
chip
implemented. So you have things like in this episode where, like, Willow realizing that Oz has dropped out of all his classes. I think it's quite a Riley heavy episode where Riley is talking to his friends about Buffy, and they're like, "Oh, she's such a catch," and he's like, doesn't really get baited by this. He also punches
Parker
for being mean to Buffy. Sorry, being mean to Willow specifically, I think. We have Spike escaping and visiting Faith. Actually, no, it's actually later. It's towards the end of the episode, I think, that they recapture Spike and they do the operation.
So Riley actually punches Parker because he's bragging about having sex with Buffy, and that's why he realizes that he likes Buffy, essentially. So
at the end of the episode, while Spike has had the whatchamacallit, the operation, he goes to attack, he drink from Willow and can't, and basically they have that incredible, very, very funny conversation where Willow says, oh, it happens to every guy, don't worry about it. Where it's basically impotence.
And I think it's like a really good example of Spike working with other characters and stuff like that. So I think and it really solidifies what the threat of the initiative is, you know, and that this is like an ongoing thing that even Spike has to be afraid of, and what they're trying to do, which has only been very vaguely implied up until now. I imagine, if I had to guess, the previous episode would probably the one ended with him once again trying to give some kind of devilish speech and him being zapped by the initiative.
Yeah, so I think that was the previous episode.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. But this is delivering on that. So I think the reason why we liked it so much at the time was because I think up until this point in season 4, the episodes are fine and there's some good ones in there, but it's not coalescing as a setting necessarily. And here we have Riley at some of his best as a character, you know, speaking to it. We have the introduction of the initiative, which at this point is a really viable, interesting, unusual thing that's happening. We have Spike being solidified into his role in this season. So things just finding its footing. So I think as the sum of its parts together, I think it's a very good watch.
Yep.
And so that's where I think the kind of where we enjoyed it so much at the time really came from.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you on all that. We were both surprised at how high this ranked. But yeah, we actually listened back to our summary of why we liked it in the podcast at the time, and we sounded convincing, so I'm convinced. Next up, we have rank number 56. Potential, which was season 7 episode 12. Joe initially rated this 8.9 internal face snakes.
Brian rated 8.1 potential slayers.
That was really creative of me. Okay, so this is the episode where Dawn thinks that she's a potential slayer and she thinks she might be special, and instead it's actually Amanda who's hiding behind the door and Dawn doing this incredibly selfless thing. It's actually very moving. Yeah.
So again, a very Dawn-centric episode. I think this takes all the weight of the conversation of how do you introduce all these teenage girls into a setting where we had one teenage girl, and how she relates to that and how she deals with being the sister of the Slayer. And there's an odd conversation, but I think a well-meaning one between her and Xander about how it can be hard to be the one who is not empowered. And I think this episode is one of the stronger ones. It's definitely one of the stronger standalone ones of season 7.
Yep.
And speaks a lot to Buffy's character as a Summers woman, as much as a person. Yeah.
And I think it's self-contained, which is it's a welcome break in season 7. And one of the articles I continuously read about while rating these is that Vox actually did a reasonably good ranking of all the different episodes of Buffy, and I keep returning to that just to see what's the general conception of this and what do they rate it, and we haven't agreed pretty much on anything. But one of the things I point out in that is that Dawn really represented, had a bunch of difficulties that she represented, what it was like to be lesser than your big sister, what it means to be struggling to fit in and all these things, and that they didn't really know what to do with her in season 6 and 7, which I would definitely agree with. And this is an episode where it actually really does work. Okay, and next up, the last for this episode, we have at number 55. Oh no, sorry, second last for this episode. At number 55, we have The Witch, season 1, episode 3. And Joel initially rated this 6.8 hairy tops out of 10.
And Brian rated it 8.2 eyes of Newt. So I think the first thing we can say here is I underrated this episode.
Yes.
In retrospect, it was the third episode we rated, and I think I was trying to be conservative, and I didn't want to say every episode was like an 8 or a 9, etc.
Yeah, of course.
So this is the third episode of season 1. This is the first Monster of the Week episode. This is the first non-vampire episode. It introduces Amy, who is a recurring witch character throughout the show, and it generally plays around the, I think actually for such an early episode, a really decent bait and switch where it's like, oh, Amy is not the threat here. Amy has been Catherine the whole time along. So actually most of the episodes that were with Amy were actually with Catherine.
What I really, really like about this episode is what she does, the witchiness of it is spooky and it's threatening. She removes people's like mouth. She makes girls go on fire while doing cheerleading.
It's like a witch by way of carrying stuff like that.
Yeah, Cordelia goes blind.
Yeah, and I think obviously the eventual fate of Catherine at the end of the episode being trapped inside the statue is pretty horrific. So I think, if I remember correctly, this might be maybe the first episode I used to keep more of a count of Giles getting knocked out. I think he gets knocked out in this episode. So I do like this more in retrospect, and it's why one of the reasons why I wanted to rank it highly.
What would you rate it now if you had a chance?
Like, it'd definitely be an 8 above, I think.
Yeah.
Taking it all together, because I think, again, it has a huge undertaking to establish, can Buffy do things other than the vampire? So if you're here for vampire and for master, do you care about cheerleader witch? And I think it does that very well. And the second most important thing to establish in this, third, so there's vampires, there's a slayer, and there is witches and witchcraft, because that is so consistent throughout Buffy. So you have to establish it all here in terms of how it works. I think it does it very consistently.
Yeah, you also have weird like subplots where like Xander's trying to give Buffy a necklace and stuff, but like it's great. Okay, next up, and actually our final episode for this, our final ranking for this episode, we have number 54, The Weight of the World, season 5, episode 21. And Joel initially rated it as 8.5 Demon Catholics out of 10.
And Brian rated this 8.5 Buffys.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding. So this is the episode where Buffy has gone catatonic.
Yeah.
Once Dawn has been stolen. So what happens is that basically Willow has to dive into Buffy's subconscious to try to help her through these 3 or 4 scenes that she keeps going back to in her brain. One of which is Dawn being brought home from the hospital. Another of which, oh my God, Booker. Oh no, what the fuck have you done? Another of which is Buffy putting a book back onto the shelf in the magic box, where she's at that moment realizing that there's nothing she can do, that she's powerless,
that she's not going to be able to defeat Glory, essentially. Yeah, so this really ranks up the tension going into the final Glory confrontation, and we have the epitome of Spike trying to remind everyone that Ben is Glory, and just them not being able to understand because the spell is in effect, and Buffy really internally trying to come to terms with the fact that death is her gift, and what does that mean? And then the final escalation is after kind of Spike has the information that he stole from Joel Grey, that once the ceremony starts, the only way to stop it would be to kill Dawn. And this is setting the stakes for what we have going into what was potentially the finale of the show.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really like about this episode is I remember we made actually a great point. I can't remember exactly who. I think one of the Super Fangs said in their message to us that they really enjoyed our interpretation of The Weight of the World. I think it might have been Elizabeth. About how we basically said that like this is an intrusive thought, that Buffy is saying, in that moment I thought it would be easier if Dawn was dead, or I can't do anything about this, and I gave up a little bit. And Willow's kind of saying, no, that doesn't have to define what you do. And it's like, no,
Buffy holds herself so responsible for everything she thinks and does at all times.
It's almost like there's a she's a lot of responsibility.
Well, no, of course she does, but she
the joke I was making there?
Because she has the weight of the world on her shoulders.
Yeah.
Thanks. She holds herself to such an incredibly impossible standard. And this episode and what she does in The Gift requires catharsis and requires maturity. She might find that maturity and that strength to do the last thing she would ever do. And I think that this entire sequence and how it ties together and how it relies on you believing in Buffy, believing her relationship with Dawn, believing the threat that Glory poses. This is a finale that more than most of the others relies on these characters working, and I think it delivers it beautifully. Yeah.
And like as a final note, you have Ben basically just in a moment while Dawn is asking him to help her escape, deciding not to anymore, deciding that it actually benefits him more to go with Glory and to do what Glory wants.
Yeah.
In a moment that really contrasts Buffy, Dawn, and Ben.
Yeah.
And really condemns him as a character, I think.
Yeah. Ben, not always the most enjoyable character to watch, but a very interesting character to consider in terms of the show.
A human. Yeah. Ultimately. Okay. Next up. Oh, wait, that's it.
Next up is the end. Of this particular segment.
Great. Next episode we'll be ratings episode 53 to 42. I'm looking forward to it. There's some really good stuff in there.
I'm imagining we're going to get into a lot of season 3s and 2s here.
Yeah, we're going to start getting season 3s and 2s, and then kind of it's going to be exciting. Okay. should we move into Cordelia Chase?
Yeah, absolutely. So over on the Cordelia Chase, we have 2 back-to-back season 5 comedy episodes for the show, and we're for a couple of reasons. I think we had some fairly plot heavy, arc heavy stuff there. We're about to go into a reasonably dense chunk once we get into Fred dying and all that kind of stuff. Spoilers. First up, we had either In Harm's Way or Harm's Way, but probably In Harm's Way, which is the rare Harmony-centric episode. And the entire thing predicates on following her through her day as Angel's secretary. We see a lot more of the inner workings of Wolfram and Hart and how they're trying to defuse various demon conflicts and find how they can do good within this. We see Harmony, despite being this well-established character and knowing the gang and all that the secretaries pool and the various like underlings and lower deckers in Wolfram and Hart don't have any time for her, and there being this tension that arises because they've contracted this expert demon negotiator to come and help them with something. And it seems like Harmony has had sex with him, woken up, found him dead, drained by a vampire. So it really lives and dies on the basis of whether you think Harmony is funny and you want to follow her. And she does great. And Mercedes McNabb carries this entire episode on her back. Yeah. She not only is funny throughout and has a lot of different kinds of funny that's not really, it doesn't really rely on her being dumb, just being kind of, she was amoral before she was a vampire. That's kind of what comes through.
Her developing a relationship with Fred, which is really enjoyable. Everyone develops a relationship with Fred in this season. Yeah,
she has a whole scenes just with Fred and kind of develop girl pals and all that kind of stuff, which works really well. And eventually she has to solve the mystery herself, and she finds out that another woman who was in the secretarial pool, who'd been there for 5 years, that Harmony leapfrogged because Wesley pulled her up to be Angel's secretary, hates her and has been trying to ruin her life, and is also a vampire. And they have a extended wire fu action sequence in the cafeteria, which is one of your favorite moments in a fight scene in the show. What was it?
I've never forgotten. I'm sorry.
It was them taking chopsticks. Two vampires fighting with chopsticks.
Those disposable chopsticks you get in like in Chinese, Japanese, or otherwise some Asian restaurants, and they come like stuck together at the top or at the bottom in that like wooden block, and you have to split them apart. Both of them do this menacingly, brandishing both chopsticks separately after they've like scrunched down the packet to get them out of it. Yeah. There was something about that visual gag that made me absolutely lose it. It is burned into my brain.
Yeah, so if you can think of any deadlier weapon to a vampire in a combat situation. And they kind of make a lot of hay in this episode with the fact that these are 2 relatively slight women, but because they're vampires and because mystical strength is a thing,
there's lots of knocking them out.
They get batter against the walls and they get absolutely smacked around. So it is great fun top to bottom. I think it actually does develop Harmony's character in an interesting way, while showing us in a way that I kind of forgotten that the Wolfram and Hart setting is kind of plausible, that they are trying to make it work, Yeah. So I personally would say 9 failed feminist gestures. I thought it was a really strong episode.
I'm going for an 8 failed feminist gestures, but a strong 8.
Yeah. One of my favorites. One of my favorite comedy episodes of the show, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, that was bracket Harm's Way. And the next episode was Sole Purpose. This is a really strange episode.
It is David Boreanaz's directorial debut.
Yeah, so from the opening scene we see a flashback to the scene of Spike and Angel drinking from the soul, becoming the chalice, becoming a champion, and Angel explodes in sunlight as Spike becomes Shanshoot. And this is the first of a lot of really, really strange sequences throughout the episode. Now, in retrospect, we eventually find out that what this is to do with this kind of an undercurrent of a Wolfram and Hart plot that the gang are trying to solve in and around what's happening to Angel. But all of the Angel stuff, for which he is mostly beg rigging in practice, because Dave Boreanaz had like torn his caused a leg injury. He is infected with this huge parasite, this demon parasite, and he is actually hallucinating and having insane dream sequences. So this includes Fred operating on a prosthetic of his torso and pulling
by far my favorite sequence of the episode.
Yeah, pulling trash out, handing license plates inside him to a full-grown bear. There's visions.
A fishbowl with fish in it comes out of his chest,
which is his soul.
Yeah.
There is a vision of
Buffy having sex with Spike.
In the bed next to Angel with audio dropped in from the episode The Prom from Buffy.
Absolutely not Sarah Michelle Gellar acting, of course.
Not in the slightest. It looked like Nick Kroll wearing a blonde wig, to be honest.
Oh.
There is him watching a really bad CGI of the apocalypse through the corporate windows while they all say Spike is out there going to save it. It's a great set of bizarre sequences because everyone gets to act out of character. Everyone gets to be menacing to Angel. Wesley is constantly given these comedic lines to do and kind of like, yeah, let's all die for each other thing. And that kind of, he's always saying that kind of stuff. He does it really well.
For my money's worth, the sequences aren't bizarre enough.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work as an episode, but I can't blame them for trying. Do you know? And running alongside this, we have Lindsay coming back and finding Spike and pretending to be Doyle from season 1 of Angel and pretending to play Doyle's role in Spike's life, that Spike is going to be the helpless, is going to be a champion, that Doyle, quote unquote, has visions and is going to help him find it. Spike trying to do that, bring out the reusing the stake bracers again,
and just doing the whole episode for Spike is a rehash of City of Angels.
City of.
Yeah.
So both of these like really fun concepts, and I will watch this any day over a lot of the Jasmine stuff in season 4 and a lot of the Connor stuff. So really I like the way they've really committed to exploring what does Spike mean to Angel of the show. The whole thing doesn't quite work. No. And we spend a lot of time.
It turns out to be Eve putting the parasites on Angel. The large parasite thing cost $80,000 to make.
Yeah, and wasn't particularly great. So part of the underlying plot here is I don't particularly think Eve works very well as a character. No.
I think the actress does a good job of it, but I don't think the differentiator enough.
Yeah, she's serviceable, but it kind of requires us to, like, if you think of Lila Morgan, if she had been in that role, like, that would go work a lot better. She's established.
Eve's actor is married to the actor who did Tucker Wells in season 3 of Buffy.
Andrew's brother.
Yeah, who we when we were doing the episode with Tucker Wells, we noted that his Wikipedia was incredibly self-involved. He'd clearly written himself.
Yeah, that's quite funny. So Eve, to be kicked out to a large degree, or to be kind of caught out in this episode, she has to be in, and she was I never bog her as actually being part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So, but I do think both of those two storylines are very interesting. Like ideas, and there's enough thrown at the wall that I would give this a 7. I think a middle low 7.
Yeah, I was going for a low 7 for feminist.
But definitely a 7. Yeah, 7 for feminist gestures. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
Thanks so much for joining us. We will programming that we will not be here next week.
Absolutely not.
Because we'll be hosting a visit of the Joel clan.
This day next week is your sister's birthday. We're gonna have a big party for her.
Yeah, I was trying to do something where it's like Death Joel Swath of the Joel Law clan or something, but it didn't really come together. But yeah, so my wonderful sister will be visiting for her birthday. It's gonna be a big family occasion, and I will have barely any bandwidth for that, let alone for podcast edition L.
Absolutely.
So you can start to ruminate on your top
53 to 42
yeah,
episodes.
Yeah, but in general we're descending into the top 50 now.
Yeah.
So you can think with that. And as always, we're very grateful to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell the leeches that are sucking the life out of you, and we will see you next time.
Hey Joel.
Hey Brian.
Have you considered listening to Buffy Boys?
On Buffy Boys. See you there.
Bye.